Well, hello, welcome to our October 2020 Talk of the Tavern. I'm Steve Jacobovic with the Historical Society of Carroll County. This is our final Talk of the Tavern for the year and likely until late 2021 or 2022. Luckily, we have a great program for you tonight while the talks are on sabbatical. So today, Frank Batavick is our guest speaker. Frank will be getting us into the Halloween spirit by digging into the 1938 H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds broadcast. The broadcast created a stir, if not a panic, among many listeners of an alien invasion. So thank you, Frank, for bringing this special multimedia presentation to our guests over Zoom. Before I go on, I'd like to do my thanks, and I want to again thank our partners in making this presentation possible, the CMC, who since May have been just fantastic partners for all of our talks and our virtual gala. The Nonprofit Center, particularly Mark Kreider, for allowing us to stream our Talk at a Tavern from their office tonight. We've muted everyone's audio for the speaker's presentation, but just to make sure there are no disruptions, please turn off your microphone and video. Both toggles are found on the lower left corner of your Zoom screen. Since we're recording this talk for future use, we ask that you refrain from asking questions until the end of the presentation. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, and I'll go over the instructions then. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce Frank Batavick. Frank is a veteran of over 40 years in the television industry, having gotten his start at Maryland Public TV, where he worked for 16 years. Serving as executive producer, or writer, he counts a Peabody and a regional Emmy among his awards. Frank is the previous chair of the Historical Society of Carroll County's Board of Trustees and a two-time past president of the Carroll County Library Board. He has a bachelor's BA in English from LaSalle University and an MA in radio, TV, film from the University of Maryland. And now it's my great pleasure, and I'm just happy to turn the presentation over to Frank for the War of the Worlds presentation. Take it away, Frank. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate the intro. And special thanks to you, the Historical Society, to Lynn Wheeler, who's the chair of our programming committee, and to the Community Media Center, and also the Carroll Nonprofit Center. So thanks to all those folks too. I couldn't have done this without all you guys. And thanks to my wife, who happens to be right here. She's the tech genius in this family, not myself. So she's been helping me as I go along here. Welcome to the COVID Broadcasting Network. That's what this is like. And I don't like this at all. I wish you were all here so I could see your faces. I could get audience reactions. I'm just not comfortable with doing things for a piece of equipment, but here we are. Even though I worked in television for many years, I'd like a live audience, but we're going to continue. So with that, I'm going to start my presentations. There you go, share screen, and then over here. All right, so 81 years ago, on October 30th, there was a radio broadcast that frightened almost 2 million people, created a FCC regulation, and made a star out of its very young producer. But before we discuss all that, let me give you a little bit of background. Okay, hold on for a second. Page down. There we go. Okay, I got it now. The person behind the broadcast was actor-director Orson Welles, and he was a child prodigy. He had been acting on the Irish stage at the young age of 16, and he came back to the States and he started the Mercury Theater of the Air. The first thing he did was a staging of Julius Caesar in modern day dress, and that really impressed the critics because people hadn't done that kind of thing before, so it showed that he was very innovative. The next thing he did was a staging of Macbeth, and that had an all-black cast, and it got rave reviews. The Works Progress Administration, as you can see from the program, helped to sponsor it, and it had a voodoo theme. Rather than Macbeth's witches, it had voodoo as the theme, and it was set in a Caribbean island. So the guy had, tremendous imagination, and it all worked out on the stage. And then he decided to take the idea to radio. They did adaptations of 17 works before they did War of the Worlds. So this has been an accepted program that they were working on. And by the way, he was only 22 in this picture. So what were you doing at 22? I certainly wasn't producing, directing, and national broadcast. Anyway, at 8 p.m., the program was up against the most popular show on radio. And it had been #1 for 18 straight months. It was the Chase and Sanborn Hour with ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and dummy Charlie McCarthy. Now, I know what you're thinking, a ventriloquist? Yeah, but the jokes were really, really funny. People tuned in. It had a 34.7% share of the possible audience, which is pretty impressive. The Mercury Theater had a 3.6% share. Okay, pretty anemic. 32 million families in the US at the time. Of those 32 million, 27.5 million had radios. So it was the mass medium. That amounts to about 1 million listeners to Mercury Theater of the Air, but that would grow on the night of October 30th, and we're going to track that for you. Wells' partner in crime was John Houseman, and he was the co-editor and the co-producer, and they talked and they said, well, let's do a science fiction show. What can we pick? So they landed upon H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Now, this was written in 1898. It was already immensely popular in pulp fiction, so people kind of knew of the story, if not the actual book. And it was a tremendous idea to choose this property. They got Howard Koch to do the script. And nobody really knows who came up with the idea of interrupting the program with news flashes and came up with real place names. Nobody's sure who came up with the concept of that. Orson Welles in later years took full credit for it, as he often did. But I think maybe Koch had something to do with it. It was Koch, though, who came up with the idea of transporting the story from England, where H.G. Wells was centered, to, of all places, New Jersey. So on the way home from work, he worked in Manhattan, he purchased a map of New Jersey and took a pencil and stabbed it at the map, and bang, that part of New Jersey showed up. And where that takes us to is Grover's Mill. Now, if you look at this map, it's right outside of Princeton Junction, okay? Right above it is Plainsboro. My wife and I lived there for 11 wonderful years. And in I don't know, 3 minutes, I could be in Grover's Mill, 4 minutes. And I just loved it because I've been a fan of this broadcast for years and years and years. And when we first moved there and I took a little ride, I said, wait, Grover's Mill? Yeah, that Grover's Mill. So why this was a good place to have it is that it was right near Trenton, a major city at the time, and it was outside of Princeton, all right? And Princeton had a university. So that really came in handy for the scripting of the show. It was also right near some major cities. You can see New Brunswick, Newark, Jersey City, Camden, Bordentown. So it was near some major towns and cities, and that led to the credibility of the whole production. And it's right outside of Cranberry, just a quaint little town. I think that might be my wife going into Teddy's right there. This is a restaurant we used to go to every Sunday after church. And it's just a quaint country town. And believe it or not, Washington did sleep there. So there's that marker from Cranberry's history. Grover's Mills itself was a farming community with a large pond and just a smattering of farmhouses at the time of the broadcast. And it had a mill, as befits Grover's Mill. And these are all photographs, by the way, that I took that I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing. The script itself was written in 6 days, which I think is pretty amazing. He was paid, Koch was paid the figure of $75 for the script. So I think that's pretty cool, that as little as $75 bought you the War of the Worlds script. Now, let's take our minds back to October 30th, 1938. It is just before 8:00 p.m. and tomorrow is Halloween. We settle in to listen to the radio. The Mercury Theater of the Air is just about to come on. I only have time to play a short segment, maybe about 4 minutes and 30 seconds or so. But I'll give you a little backstory. Here's what's happened so far before we joined it, okay? We've heard theme music. We know it's a show. We've heard an opening announcement. We know it's a show. It identifies the program as Mercury Theater of the Air. Orson Welles comes on and he does a program introduction, all right? Then we hear a weather report, some Spanish music, Spanish themed music from the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City. Then that's interrupted by another announcer who says there's been some mysterious gas explosions on Mars. It goes back to music. Then it goes to an interview with Professor Pearson at the Princeton Observatory. While he's being interviewed, he gets a telegram that tells him that a meteorite has hit somewhere near Princeton. So he wants to go see it. Then there's more incidental music, okay? He goes to a farm in Grover's Mill to see the meteorite, and he just discovers a crater with a strange capsule embedded inside of it. A frightening creature begins to emerge from this crater. And now we're going to play a little bit of the program. So stand by if I figure this out. Here we go.
Someone calling someone or something. I can see turning out of that black hole two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost... But heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me. Oh, yeah, I can see the thing's body. Now it's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black, and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate, and the monster, or whatever it is, can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's rising up now, and the crowd falls back. They've seen plenty. The most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words. Well, I'll pull this microphone with me as I talk. I'll have to stop the description until I can take a new position. Hold on, will you, please? I'll be right back in a minute.
We are bringing you an eyewitness account of what's happening on the Wilmuth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmuth's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. More state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit. About 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain's conferring with someone. Can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted, and the professor moves around one side, studying the object, while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles, spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
This is called dead air.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity. In the meantime, we have a late bulletin from San Diego, California. Professor Indelkoffer, speaking at a dinner of the California Astronomical Society, expressed the opinion that the explosions on Mars are undoubtedly nothing more than severe volcanic disturbances on the surface of the planet. We continue now with our piano interlude. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill, their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. No one will be permitted to enter this area except by special pass issued by state or military authorities. 4 companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton to Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. Thank you.
Okay. Now, by 8:32, Davidson Taylor, who was the CBS programming supervisor, was advised of what was happening outside the building and across the country. He was asked to stop the show. The 2 producers, John Houseman and Orson Welles, said, nothing doing. No, we're moving ahead with this thing. So they kept the broadcast going. And people kept on listening, and the panic continued. There was a large volume of phone calls. 60% of the local stations airing the program received phone calls, and they had to break into the broadcast to tell people, hey, this is just a drama, okay, not real. The New York City police surrounded the CBS building because the crowds were forming, and there was complete mass hysteria. An estimated 12 million people listened to the broadcast, but 1 out of 12 thought it was absolutely true. And a percentage of them ran out of their homes, put wet towels over their faces, and some of them even thought they saw the creatures in the distance. They clutched their children, they jumped in their cars, and they hit the highway. And the highway started getting really clogged right around that area. Churches were jammed with people who went in to confess their sins. And I'm going to read you some individual segments from this book that Howard Koch wrote, and it has the full script in it, but I want to share with you some of the reactions that folks had. I tuned in when the weather reports were given. I was with my little boy. My husband was at the movies. I thought it was all up with us. I grabbed my boy and just sat there and cried. My wife and I were driving through the redwood forest in Northern California when the broadcast came over our car radio. At first, it was just New Jersey, but soon the things were landing all over, even in California. There was no escape. All we could think about was trying to get back to LA to see our kids and be with them when it happened. We went right by gas stations, but I forgot we were low on gas. In the middle of the forest, our gas ran out. There was nothing to do. We just sat there holding hands, expecting any minute to see those Martian monsters appear over the tops of the trees. When Orson said it was a Halloween prank, it was like being reprieved on the way to the gas chamber. So, and then one more. This one I really like. I can get to this silly thing. Here it is. My girlfriend and I were at a party in the village, I assume Greenwich Village. Someone turned on the radio. It was just when the Martians were spraying the people at Grover's Mill with the heat ray. At first, we couldn't believe it was happening, but it was so real. We stayed glued to the radio, getting more scared every minute. My girl began to cry. She wanted to be with her family. The party broke up in a hurry, our friends scattering in all directions. I drove like crazy up 6th Avenue. I don't know how fast, 50, maybe 60 miles an hour. The traffic cops at the street crossings just stared at us. They couldn't believe their eyes, whizzing right past them, going through red lights. I didn't care if I got a ticket. It was all over anyway. Funny thing, none of the cops chased us. I guess they were too flabbergasted. My apartment was on the way, so I stopped just long enough to rush in and shout up to my father that the Martians had landed and we were all going to be killed, and I was taking my girl home. When we got to her place, her parents were waiting for us. My father had called them, told them to hold me there until he could send a doctor, as I'd gone out of my mind. Isn't that terrific? So people really bought into this thing. And I'll tell you what people and why they bought into it. Okay, in every state, telephone operators were overwhelmed. Local stations reported a 500% increase in calls. New York City police and CBS switchboards were completely jammed. The city's Riverdale Drive became impassable because of the traffic. Northern New Jersey was even worse. Train stations and bus terminals were jammed with people who said, I need a ticket. I don't care where to, just give me a ticket out of here. There were 875 calls to the New York Times asking, what should I do? Where can I go to be safe? Governors were telling their constituents that martial law had not been declared in the state and not to be worried about it. After the show, the cast were told to stay where they were and not leave the building. They were questioned by police and the press and offered police protection. Orson Welles and John Houseman received threatening phone calls. One was from a Midwest mayor, and he said, I want to tell you one thing. If this is a prank, I'm going to get in my car, drive east, and punch you both in the nose. So Orson Welles called a press conference, and he was absolutely surprised that people fell into this child's fairy tale, as he called it. It was only a play. I don't know why they took it so seriously. Hey, look, I didn't mean any harm. The next day, newspapers were full of headlines. Radio fake scares nation, fake radio war. And so this thing was legit. People were really scared. There were numerous editorials. There were editorial cartoons that appeared in the newspaper. They were questioning a lot of things. They were saying, is it the fault of our schools? Schools often get blamed. Are we not educating our kids correctly that they believed in this? Why did this happen? What if we had to go to war, which we did eventually, in less than a few years? Our people wouldn't be prepared if we had to go to war, if they can get scared by a radio broadcast. So this was a pretty big deal. The Hadley Cantrell, who was at Princeton University, and he was in charge of research, and Frank Stanton, who was a researcher for CBS News, got together and they said, let's study this. The results of their study was this book here, The Invasion from Mars. It has the complete script in it by Hadley Cantrell, and it has the researchers that helped to work on this. Now, this was published in 1940. It revealed that approximately 1.7 million people believed the program to be a news broadcast, and about 1.2 million were scared enough to do something about it. Cantrell and his staff interviewed 135 people in the central New Jersey area that were, close to Grover's Mill. Also, the Mercury Theater of the Air, CBS, the FCC, and other stations shared all the letters and telegrams and whatever other correspondence that they got from people complaining about the broadcast. All of this went into the study, hence the eyewitness accounts I was able to read from you for you. The team discovered that farmers had actually gone out to hunt the Martians. And I think this is a cool picture. This is an artist's conception of what the Martian spacecraft looked like. That's a water tower next to it. I took that picture not too far from where we lived. And according to the locals, it has bullet holes in it. I didn't get close enough to climb the tower to check out for bullet holes, but I thought that was a cool story when I took the picture. One study, or rather the study concluded, and I'm going to quote here from the study, for a few horrible hours, people from Maine to California thought that hideous monsters armed with death rays were destroying all armed resistance sent against them. There was no escape from disaster. The end of the world was near. So here's what they figured out, that the people who believed in it lacked intellectual and emotional maturity for the most part. They also lacked critical ability or maturity. If they were thinking, they would have gone to the radio and changed the station and not found the same broadcast on all these other stations and said, well, I guess it's not real. But they didn't think to do that. There was also a correlation between their level of fear, their education, and their economic status. And I'll get to more about that in a second. The most vulnerable were those who had not completed grammar school, elementary school at the time, and had been on relief for 3 years. Don't forget, this is during the Great Depression, so they'd been on relief. and they were just down on themselves. Also, those with really strong religious beliefs believed in the broadcast. Research showed that 28% of Princeton graduates believed in the broadcast. So I talked about education level, but 28% of people who went to Princeton thought it was real. 35% of those with high incomes at the time, I don't know what that meant, probably something over $15,000, they believed in the broadcast. And they thought that they were hearing straight news. There were many lawsuits that followed. People complained of all kinds of calamities, car crashes, miscarriages, and things of that sort. They never made it to court. And I think it's probably because they were afraid of setting some kind of precedent. The Federal Communications Commission came out, and George Henry Payne, who was one of the commissioners, he labeled the whole cast, all the actors, terrorists. We've heard that before. The FCC later called the incident regrettable and proposed a new radio code that would not permit fake broadcast or breaking into programs with fake broadcast. So, and we haven't had that to this day. Other stations followed suit. So what happened? There's no magic bullet theory. We can't point to one thing, obviously the broadcast, but there was a lot of reasons why that happened. And now we're going to take a look at what those reasons were. Many of the people had dial surfed. Here's the story with the competition. A lot of the people were listening to Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, and they were funny. If you don't know them, you want to check them out on the internet. And they had some funny routines. Their bit was followed by a coffee commercial, and then came a singer, the Vagabond King, Nelson Eddy. And all of us remember, I'll Be Loving You, or what was it? Okay. But anyway, he had a big hit at the time. So he probably sang that big hit. Then he went into a second song about a Canadian lager. Well, a lot of the people said, well, I laughed at Edgar Bergen. I kind of like that song. I want to listen to a Canadian lager. So they changed the station. They flipped just like we do with our remotes. If we get bored, we get out the old remote and we change it. So they flipped to another station, which happened to be the one with War of the Worlds, and they joined it just as the Martians were zapping people. So that's the explanation one of the explanations they came up with. But why did they act the way they did? Well, a lot of them were feeling insecure, as I said. They were suffering the results of the Great Depression, and they were still down in the doldrums. And so the radio was their big, the hope in life, their anchor to reality. And they listened to it all the time. And when you heard something on there, you tended to believe it. They also had FDR doing his famous fireside chats. And they loved listening to him, assuring everybody, we're going to get through this, folks. Don't worry about it. The Works Progress Administration is going to do this, and we're going to do that. And so they trusted radio to give them the straight news. There were also great war fears at the time. A month before, Hitler had threatened Europe with an invasion of Czechoslovakia, and Britain, France, and Italy agreed to cede part of the Sudetenland to Hitler as an appeasement, just to avoid war at the time. And when that happened, networks started breaking into programs to give you news breaks, okay? Just like they do now with the text that goes across the bottom. And they would give you a news bulletin, which was a brand new practice, but people started getting used to that. Also, many listened to Edward R. Murrow on CBS. And at the time, he was in London. He was our correspondent over there. And if you haven't heard those broadcasts, they're fantastic. He'd be on the rooftop, a rooftop in London, watching the bombs rain down, or the V-2 rockets rain into London, and report that live to people. So they were used to hearing this, rockets landing, bombs falling, also poison gas, because Hitler used poison gas. So people heard that and said, maybe this is real. Maybe this is really happening. Also, he had told parents, Edward R. Murrow, that people in London were telling their kids, take your gas mask to school, because we don't know whether there'll be a German attack or not. That's pretty scary. So if they hear that kind of stuff, it's going to, stick up here. At the time, there had also been the Hindenburg crash. And I'm going to take a drink of water, excuse me. Get a little froggy here. And a lot of you out there are probably remembering the Hindenburg. It happened in New Jersey, actually not too far from where we lived. and it crashed and burned, killing everybody on board. And it was covered live on radio. And the announcer described it to his radio audience as the Hindenburg, which had flown all across the Atlantic from Germany, crashed and burned. And one of the famous things about that is he said, "Oh, the humanity." So the announcer who worked on this broadcast listened to that broadcast and tried to mimic the way he talked when the Hindenburg crashed. So it made it very, very believable. Also, I should mention that Fortune magazine reported at the time, people love their soap operas, and some of them would write into the soap operas and about the concern of their characters, but they believed the characters were real. And they would say things like, "Oh, tell Ethel and Tom to stop fighting so much and enjoy their marriage," really believing that this was real life. So there's that mentality that's going on there too. Fortune magazine also reported that there was more faith in radio commentators than in newspapers, especially for war news. But some listeners thought the program's announcements were wrong about the Martians and believed it was Germans invading, and they were trying to guess them. I'm going to take another little swig here. Radio was still relatively new at the time, a new mass medium, and many people had come to blur the line between reality and news, and that was also an issue, and that was what I just talked about with the soap opera. So they weren't sure what was happening and not happening as they listened to these radios. It was also an era where people had a great deal of faith in experts, okay? The respect for authority. The program was loaded with experts. It had Professor Pearson from the Princeton Observatory, the head of the state police, a brigadier general, and you heard him, the commander of the state militia. And this is all despite the fact that in this script, CBS had dictated certain changes. And before the broadcast, CBS said, "I don't want you to get people concerned, so change the Museum of Natural History to the Natural History Museum." Not much of a change, but they changed it. Changed National Guard to the militia, and they did that. Changed the US Weather Bureau to the Government Weather Bureau. And changed CBS to the Intercontinental Radio News, okay? So how many people listening to a broadcast are going to say, "Oh, Government Weather Bureau isn't the US Weather Bureau"? You know, very, very few people, okay? So it was not very effective in what CBS asked them to do. A lot had to do with the location that was selected. The broadcast slid back and forth between this fictionalized radio drama and real place names. They talked about Newark and New Brunswick and Jersey City and Camden. They talked about real places. And a lot of that is because of where the broadcast supposedly took place, within, driving distance of all these cities and towns. And so the Martians were coming, and that's before these capsules started landing all over the country, including California. The broadcast used a classic propaganda technique used by totalitarian states to create anxiety in a nation. And what they do, and what the Nazis did, is they create tension, and then they release the tension. Then they create tension again, and then they release the tension. And this gets a country just anxious when all this happens. And Hitler's propaganda minister, Goebbels, he used that all the time, and it worked on their population. It also screwed around with the whole concept of time. People got so involved in it that they didn't ask themselves, "Wait a minute, I'm listening to a 1-hour radio broadcast, and I just learned that the city of New York has evacuated? That can't happen in an hour, okay? That things are happening in California, but aren't, so they just accepted the fact that all this was transpiring within a certain period of time when it would be impossible because, time doesn't support that. There was also something called the power of the theater of the mind. And radio was so expert at using music, narration, and sound effects to create the theater of the mind. I wanted to give you some examples. I'll tell you a little story. My son loved this broadcast. I don't know whether he's watching or not, but he absolutely loved this broadcast. So I played it for him, and so he told one of his buddies at the time about this really cool show that my father has about the Martians. And so this friend came over to the house, and the friend said, "Mr. Batavick, can I have that show you've got about the Martians? Can I hear that?" I said, "Sure." So I had the LP record at the time. So I played the LP record, 33 and a third, for the boys, and they listened to it. And when it was all over, this little boy, a friend of my son, says, "Can I see that again?" And that really stuck with me. Wow, can I see it again? That kid saw all these things up here, and that's what we call theater of the mind. It also, there was the overall production quality of the program. It had fantastic acting, realistic sound effects, long transmission cutoffs. You heard those blanks that were in there that we call dead air in the broadcasting industry. And when people hear dead air, they go, "Oh, that's not right." Right. So they built dead air into the broadcast to make it seem real. And then announcers coming in and cues, and there were things like they'd be interviewing somebody, they'd say, "Speak closer and louder, please." Or they would say, they were interviewing a farmer, and he goes, "Want me to tell you some more?" And the announcer says, No, that's quite all right. That's plenty. And later, the announcer, and we heard part of that, whether you noticed it or not, the announcer comes on and says, "Ladies and gentlemen," am I on? Which I think is one of those things that make you think this is real, this is all happening. And keep in mind that this is all happening live in a studio, and that no pre-produced sound effects, music, like we would do today. Everything was live at that time, so it was pretty amazing. The program also included opening, middle, and closing announcements. The last was when Orson Welles explained that all this was a prank, and I'm going to try to share that with you right now.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.
Now, come on, is that good writing or what? I mean, it's just fantastic writing. I just love that stuff.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, here I go.
Out of character.
Okay, Orson, thank you. Page down. There we go. There's my 33 and a third record that I paid for Frankie's friend. Today, the Panic broadcast, as it's called, ranks as one of the most famous events in broadcasting history. It helped put the sleepy town of Grover's Mill on the map. Today, at the pond, there's a memorial. And again, this was right where we live. So I was in heaven. We'd visit this place. So there's this memorial, and there's a little close-up of it. And on the left, you can see, you can't really read it, but it tells you on the morning of October 30th, et cetera. It tells you the whole story and the people being panicked by the broadcast. So this was installed, as it says, on the 50th anniversary. So, all right, what happened to the people who had been part of this broadcast? I mean, were they, schmucks and went on to do nothing? I don't think so. They were all kind of went on to great fame. We all know about Wells. He finally got a sponsor for his show after this broadcast. Campbell Soup stepped forward and they said, "Oh, gee, we'll sponsor this." So, and he was invited to the White House. Okay, that's pretty impressive. All right. He later went to Hollywood and directed some movie you may have heard of called Citizen Kane. It's still listed on many lists of critics as the best film ever made. And my son and my granddaughter just watched that recently, and she loved it. And how old is Gracie? About 16 or 17, I think. So she absolutely loved it. John Houseman had a terrific career. He went on to be a Broadway producer and director, and he starred in film, most notably 1973's The Paper Chase, for which he won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. All right, so he did pretty well. Howard Koch did okay. He actually wrote the script for Casablanca, which is unbelievable, okay? So he did real well with that. He also went on to write many other films, including The Manchurian Candidate, and of all things, Airplane. And I'll put that together. But the guy was very talented. He could write almost anything. So, but you know, wow, what a resume that he had. He also wrote the book that I wrote from. This is Frank Stanton. He rose in the CBS ranks from being one of their researchers to becoming the president of CBS from 1946 to 1971. So all those people had fantastic track records after they did the War of the Worlds broadcast, not because of luck, because of sheer talent. They were just a talented bunch. The War of the Worlds continues to captivate people years and years later, as I hope it's captivated you tonight. It's captivated media producers. Lots more Pulp Fiction, lots more books with CD-ROMs that you can play. There was a movie that came out in 1953, The War of the Worlds. You can check out the trailer online if you want to. I did. I was kind of disappointed in it. I mean, it was one of those typical 50s movies, and they don't seem, both that movie and another movie that Steven Spielberg did with Tom Cruise. They don't follow the plot. I mean, it's called War of the Worlds, and I couldn't wait to see the Tom Cruise movie. And it's not really the script. And it doesn't take place in New Jersey, and I'm a Jersey guy, and it's like, wait, not New Jersey? No, it took place someplace else. I don't know where. So I was disappointed in that. Now, the one on the far left, Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds, you got to go online and listen to that. If you go on iTunes, you can listen to individual cuts, not the whole cut, but at least part of it. It was a musical concept album that ran 95 minutes and has sold 15 million copies, okay? It had original music, original lyrics. It had the narration of Richard Burton as Professor Pearson. Okay, that's not bad. In 2018, just a couple of years ago, it was named the 32nd best-selling studio album of all time in the UK. Now think about that, 32nd, big deal. But they had the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, okay? So they had some big stars. And this concept album has really sold. I listened to some cuts, and it's kind of haunting music, kind of interesting. If you get a chance to go on iTunes, listen to a few cuts, maybe you want to buy it. I think it's $14.98. I didn't buy it, but it's pretty cool. Let's see, Orson Welles, of course, his genius was just amazing. He was able to fool millions, but you think it could happen again? Okay, it happened back then in '38. Could it happen again? Yeah, it did. On February 12th, 1949, in Quito, Ecuador, and at the time there was a population of about 275,000 people. Radio Quito was the most popular station, and in the same building as the newspaper El Comercio. The head of the station, Leonard Pais, had the newspaper run little articles about strange objects that had been seen in the sky just the week before the broadcast of War of the Worlds. During the broadcast, people were panicking in the streets. Some made a beeline for churches. There was a convoy of military trucks and police headed toward the north of the city to fight the Martians. When people found out it was a prank, they stormed the radio station, hurled rocks at windows, broke into the station, damaged the presses of the newspaper, and set the building on fire. 15 people died. The announcer pleaded for help and jumped out the 4th floor onto a balcony, but he burned his hands. Then he asked the mob, if he jumped, would you catch me? I shouldn't laugh, but if I jump, would you catch me? He jumped, they didn't catch him. So he landed, he survived, but he broke multiple bones, ended up, of course, in the hospital, carried those injuries the rest of his life. Pais, the head of the station, who was responsible for the whole thing, fled the country. Okay, he just left because he knew that he'd be in big trouble. So, okay, all right, that's way back then. It happened in Quito. Could it happen here in the US again? Yes, it happened in Buffalo, New York. In 1968, on Halloween night, WKBW updated the broadcast and used DJs to deliver announcements about strange objects in the sky. and talking about NASA, that NASA has warned them that there are some strange things in the sky, and also we may be experiencing some transmission difficulties because of explosions on the surface of Mars. So your favorite DJ was telling you stuff like that. And then they did the broadcast following the script exactly. Well, Buffalo Police and the telephone company received 4,000 phone calls. The Canadian police went to the Peace Bridge right on the border to block invaders, all right? So yeah, we fell for it again back in '68. Now, why were the people fooled again? Well, Hadley Cantrell, he came out in 1966, and he thought we were ripe for believing the same kind of thing again. He said there was a matrix for high suggestibility. People were getting used to the idea of killing machines from the sky because of intercontinental ballistic missiles and killer satellites, not a problem. And also, New York City had a panic during the Great Blackout back then. And so he said, based on those two things, I think somebody could get away with it again. Our cable TV news shows continue to spread panic through talks about extreme weather, mass shooters, and COVID-19. And they do all that looking for high ratings. So could one of them pull it off again? I don't know. I think it's more probable for radio than for TV because of the theater of the mind business. But who knows? All right. Happy Halloween, everybody, and thanks for joining us. That's it. What do I do now, Lynn?
Well, we're going to take some questions.
Okay.
So thank you, Frank, for that. That's an amazing presentation. The story of what happened in Quito is pretty
I know.
pretty crazy.
Serious stuff, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we do have time to take some questions. To ask a question via Zoom, you can raise your hand or use the chat box feature. I'll go over the instructions again. I think most of you know how to do this, but to raise your hand, move your mouse to the bottom of the Zoom window and a menu will appear. Tap on the participant button and that will bring up a list of participants. At the bottom of the participant list, you'll see a raise hand box. Click on that, and then you'll see a dialog box asking you to allow us to unmute you. Click yes, and your mic will be unmuted so you can ask a question. Or you can use the chat box feature, which is on the bottom of your Zoom screen to type in your question, which I will read out loud. In chat, you can send a message to everyone or use the pull down menu to send a message to a single participant.
Steve, we have a question from William, and I have unmuted William.
Great.
Hey, okay, this is Bill. Frank, did you find any connections to Central Maryland, Carroll County specifically? Any local?
I did not. I did go into the library and I researched the day after the broadcast and a couple of days after the broadcast, and I was disappointed because I thought that's a great local angle. And I could talk about, you know, people being in Hampstead or New Windsor being upset, but I didn't find it. Now, having said that, I know Mimi will go in tomorrow and find it, but this guy didn't find it.
I'm sorry, you may have mentioned this, but what was the range of the broadcast? Was it
National broadcast?
National broadcast, okay.
Oh, yeah. That's why people in California panicked, and, you know, the guy in the Redwood Forest and all that, you know. It was CBS Network.
Okay, somebody just had a comment. JP, great presentation, is thrilling and perhaps a wonderful prep for the presidential debate to follow. So
Well,
that is
we'll see.
yeah. Let's see if we have any other questions.
I got the last 15 minutes.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Let's see.
Frank, how do you feel, this is Lynn, how do you feel that we have changed in our interpretation of what is real or fake news, if you will, as compared to 1938?
I was going to try to avoid that, Lynn. I think that we're just as susceptible to fake news now as we were back then. I mean, you don't want to get political, but what people have bought into about voting by mail and all that business, okay, today's Carroll County Times, the confusion that people say about COVID, who do we believe? Who can we believe? And there's a tremendous deficit in credibility in this country with the scientific community and the American population. And I think that really pains me, because back then when the broadcast took place, they trusted science, they trusted experts. And today, not so much.
It is a big issue. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I did give this talk before, not the fancy PowerPoint that you guys got tonight, at the Carroll Lutheran Village a couple of years ago. And there was a guy in the audience who remembers the broadcast. He was alive at the time. And I thought that was really cool.
Oh, that is cool. Sam Riley has a question, Frank.
Okay.
Sam said, how about the Blair Witch Project? Does it qualify as a panic broadcast?
Yeah, no, that's excellent.
As real footage.
In fact, I taught communication courses at Western Maryland College, then McDaniel. And this was one of my lectures, and I used to talk about the Blair Witch Project. I took it out of the lecture because I figured nobody out there would remember it. But people did believe it was real, and they, you can Google that if you don't know what we're talking about, but it was a film, and it was shot handheld, and it made me nauseous to try to watch it. But anyway, but check that out, because people believed it was real, what transpired in that film. But they believed what it really had happened to the people, and they shot it with amateur video equipment, running through woods with a camera and that kind of thing. And it did have the patina of reality to it. So good point, Sam.
Really good point. I remember that. Kind of was a sensation when it came out back in.
Oh yeah, it was, because of the number of people who believed it. Right.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Do we have any other questions, Lynn?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Okay. Well, wonderful.
Right.
Looks like we're finishing early.
All right, well, I have a few now.
Everybody drinks.
Everyone go away just yet. Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, all. Happy Halloween. Oh, one more thing, Steve. How many people we have left? Probably not many people. Okay. We usually charge for this. We usually charge for this event. Am I done? Is it the Uber?
You're done.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. I was going to tell people to go online and donate to the Historical Society.
No, you're not done. You're on.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Okay. We usually charge for this event because of COVID and Zoom and all. We're not charging. But if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, go online, the Historical Society, and you can find ways that you can contribute. And even if it's $3, $5, whatever it is, we appreciate it. Okay. $100, I'll know I did a good job. All right. But thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Frank.
Bye, Frank. I'm turning you off.
Okay.
Yep. So as Frank said, on our homepage on the very top right, there is a donate button, and we usually do charge $3 for members, $7 for non-members. You can certainly donate as much as you wish if you enjoyed it, but small gifts do add up to make a big difference. And a rebroadcast of this presentation will be available on the CMC's YouTube page soon, probably within a week, and also on our website. On our website, if you go to the Discover tab and a video, you'll be able to see it there. Okay, so before I go, there are a few upcoming announcements for Historical Society events. This is for HSCC members only, so please join us, become a member. But our members are invited to our annual business meeting. Typically, the event is held in person and includes a meal, but this year we are doing it virtually. The annual meeting will include a report by me on the state of the society, a financial update from our treasurer, Tyler Codd, the election of our members of the Board of Trustees, and we'll also have a guest speaker this year. Allison Tolman, the Vice President of Collections and Interpretation at the Maryland Center for History and Culture, formerly the Maryland Historical Society, will give a special presentation on their Spectrum of Fashion exhibition. She'll go behind the scenes, the process of analyzing, conserving, researching, and mounting the nearly 100 garments that have become their exhibition. So we are definitely looking forward to that. The program will be live via Zoom on November 4th at 7 p.m. And to register, email Catherine Lusher, exec assistant at hsccmd.org, or call us at 410-848-6494, extension 200. And you can find all that information on our website. We also have our next Box Lunch Talk marks the 100th, I'm sorry. So lastly, 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution. On Tuesday, November 17th at 12 p.m., our Box Lunch Talk speaker will be Marilyn Hanchett. She'll review significant events that led to the voting rights for women, as well as explore its continued relevance, supporting today's discussions about women's and civil rights. The program will be live via Zoom, so go to our events page on our website to register for that talk. And lastly, our Breaking Barriers exhibit, focusing on women's suffrage and temperance, is now open at the galleries of Cocky. So please give us a call to make an appointment to come visit and learn about the amazing stories of local women in these two movements. So I hope everyone had a great day and a cap to an evening. Enjoy the debate tonight. Continued good health and stay safe. Have a great evening. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on November 17th. Thanks, everyone.